The 80s and 90s were a time where arcade ports to consoles were always a compromise. Home consoles could just not keep up with the significantly more powerful arcade hardware of the era. With its release in 1995, the Sony PlayStation was an opportunity to leverage new and powerful hardware to bring arcade experiences home, and Namco was invested in getting as many of their properties ported to Sony's machine as possible. Air Combat, an arcade game from 1993, was chosen by Namco to receive a port job to the PlayStation, but once again, the hardware was not up to the task. Namco quickly realized Sony's new hardware would not be able to do this game justice, and instead opted to develop an entirely new game from scratch, trying to keep the same spirit as the arcade game. No less than 11 entries later, Air Combat would serve as the origins of the now legendary Ace Combat series. While today, Ace Combat 7 is the pinnacle of virtual arcade dogfighting, in 1995, Air Combat had a lot to prove. Could a fully 3D dogfighting game on a home console from 1995 work? Today, we're breaking out the original PlayStation to revisit the origins of Ace Combat to see if this old plane can still exhilarate and excite today. Air Combat's primary mode is a 4 or 5 hour long campaign that casts you as a pilot in a mercenary force of top guns brought in to save some unnamed country from a terrorist organization that has taken control. It's a laughably thin plot, but it's just an excuse to get you into a wide variety of environments and planes to start blowing stuff up and experiencing the high-flying thrills Air Combat has to offer. Which unfortunately brings me to one of my first complaints about the title. The presentation is sorely lacking. While I have to look at this game through the lens of an arcade game getting remade for the home market in 1995, it still falls short even for the era. The story of the game is delivered entirely in essentially PowerPoint briefings at the start of each mission. However, it would seem that the team working on these completely forgot to mix the audio, as the narration is almost entirely drowned out by the briefing music.
The base itself is a hard nut to crack. We will isolate it by eliminating its bridge and central runway. Target, red suspension bridge to the island.
It's also hard to miss the failings of the graphics. Once you get past the briefing, you get to pick a plane to fly the mission in, and while the graphics on this screen don't look too bad, once you're actually in-game, things take a nosedive. Air Combat may run at 60 frames per second, but the graphics suffer terribly for it. Nightmarish pop-in plagues every mission, forcing you to rely heavily on the map toggle to know where you need to go. The graphics and texture work are low resolution and muddy at best, which often results in me not seeing enemies or chasing a blob that I thought was an enemy, only to find out it was my wingman. While this is also simply an inherent problem of the era, the 3D graphics of Air Combat often seem incorrectly placed and built. Much of the basic 3D polygonal structures and environments have seams that can be seen through, and it removes much of the immersion. What does work about the presentation, however, is the music and in-game audio. From the menus to the battle music, the audio is a masterclass. Take a listen to some of the high-flying battle music that perfectly complements the high-G gameplay. As you fly, you'll get helpful tips from your co-pilot who will call out the location of any nearby enemies, as well as callouts for when you miss or hit someone. His callouts, while extremely repetitive, go a long way towards building the all-important immersion of being a jet pilot. That audio immersion goes a long way towards sucking you into every mission. Air Combat's campaign takes place over 17 missions that largely have you flying around an environment seeking out specific targets to kill. Sometimes it's bomber planes, sometimes you're taking out ground targets. One particularly fun mission has you taking out a bridge. For a little variety, a couple of missions are canyon runs where you have to fly low to the ground to reach a target. And there's even one dreaded escort mission. As you fly each mission, you can actively switch between first and third person views, which both have their benefits and drawbacks. First person allows you to better track use of your machine guns, altitude, and speed, while third person gives you better visibility for all important missile locks on enemy jets. Despite the differing attributes of the wide variety of planes you can fly, you will largely find yourself chasing the next objectives on the game's map, and then outmaneuvering your opponent until you can line up an enemy in your sights. Even then, you have to be wary of the direction the enemy is flying in. Firing a missile at an enemy flying perpendicular to you, even if you have a missile lock, will almost always miss. you'll want to get yourself lined up behind an enemy to do the most damage. Each mission you complete will result in some amount of money earned, which can be spent on purchasing new planes to fly in or hiring wingmen to fly alongside you. The wingmen are largely useless, so I wouldn't recommend spending too much on them. Air combat tries to push the idea that your decisions matter. Every time you fail a mission, that plane is lost from your inventory and must be repurchased or replaced, and dead wingmen are gone forever. By not allowing you to replay missions, this creates a finite amount of money you can earn and spend, forcing you to think strategically. In practice, you just reload your save file and try again, which completely eliminates that tension from the game. Most of the missions are quite fun to play through. Despite the shortcomings in the presentation, the core dogfighting gameplay manages to still be exhilarating to this day. Frequently, throughout my playthrough, I would find myself leaning into the twists and turns and barrel rolls as I chased down my enemies. While the game is repetitive, that core gameplay loop that spawned the entire Ace Combat series is strong enough here to stand the test of 27 years. For all intents and purposes, Air Combat never really left the PlayStation 1. A phone port was released in 2005, but quickly became unplayable after 2006, and I cannot find any footage of its existence. However, being a PlayStation 1 game, it can be played on the PS1, PS2, and PS3 without any issue. Most of the capture seen in this video comes from the PlayStation 3, which runs the game on a near flawless PlayStation emulator and outputs a very clean digital signal over HDMI. But there are many other ways to play the game which can give you different visual looks that you may prefer or dislike that I've shown here. While there are many different ways to play the game today, just be aware that each may provide you a slightly different visual experience. Air Combat may be a game that's rough around the edges today. Its graphics, story, and presentation leave a lot to desire. But for a series to still be alive and well today, there had to be an outstanding foundation there, and Air Combat delivers that. It's fascinating to see where the series came from today, and it's still worth throwing a few hours into on a Saturday afternoon. And it won't break the bank either, with copies currently going for little more than $10. Good luck, pilot, and while we wait for Ace Combat 8, good hunting.